Good morning, everybody. Warm welcome to you all. Thanks to every one of you that's joined one of our coffee club sessions before. I know that, I've recognised lots of names and faces, so it's great to see you all. Just once again to remind you that this session is being recorded because it's so important, so there will be a recording available afterwards. What we're going to ask this morning is if all questions could just go into the chat for now. Please do ask them, but we're going to come to questions at the end rather than do them throughout the session. But yes, please do get involved. Ask all of those burning questions for Tim. Just to say as well that we have got new sessions being published that are coming up. So please do go back to the Coffee Club website and I'll put a link in at the very end so people can sign up to the new sessions that are being published. So I am going to share my screen and hand over to Tim.
Marvellous. Good morning, one and all. Thank you for joining us today, and big thanks to the SBS team for providing the platform and all the technical support that allows events like this to take place. Particular mention in dispatches to the wonderful Becky for her chairing role this morning. I chose the 10th of May slot from the slots that were available from SBS Coffee Club because I was kind of convinced that the CIF would have been out by now. I'd had various conversations with the ESFA and they were left in no doubt about the criticism that they were schooled via the obvious sources, i.e. your good selves, myself, Schools Week, TES, etc. in terms of the impact that the last 2 years delays in announcement meant for schools trying to deliver over the optimum summer period. And I was genuinely convinced that it would be out back at traditional Easter time. Further evidence of that was clearly the fact that they did not push back the traditional December deadline to January, and therefore they have had the requisite number of months that traditionally they've always had to process the applications and then make the announcement. Obviously, last week we were back to our Glastonbury of the circuit, the Schools and Academy show, where again, in the past, that the announcement has often been made there, which is kind of added to the excitement, etc. But we now understand that it was pushed back because of local elections last week, and I understand again from a reliable source that it will certainly come out in the month of May, but what date is anyone's guess. So I guess we still have 3 weeks to go. It could be any time between now and then. Now, my original plan was to crunch all of the numbers, all of the stats that I've been looking at for CIF, basically taken from various sources, but over the last sort of 6 years, and provide you with the most accurate, the most contemporary data available, especially from the 22-23 round. However, because it hasn't come out, we're just going to not be able to include that round of data, I'm afraid. I suspect that many of us have various theories as to what type of schools are awarded CIF, where they are located, and kind of what their financial standing is. And I thought it would be a worthwhile exercise to maybe find out, using some of the key metrics, what the answers to those theories were. It's a falsifiable theory. Let's test it. Let's see where we are. And although the results may not surprise you, and even a cynic like me, I did find some of them quite exceptional in the end. Could I have the second slide, please, Bex? So this is what we're going to look at this morning. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint here. You can all read. So that's the route that, in fact, that we're going to go down. And I kind of wanted to look at what the macro data was that can make up a CIF awarded school, what type of projects the ESFA are likely to fund, or most likely to fund, what marks are required from each of the 3 sections to make a successful CIF bid, and kind of, given that the volume of bids that are submitted every December, kind of what makes a bid stand out, and then finally, what your questions throughout the course of this this presentation. Please feel free to use the chat box for any questions, but as I said, we're kind of going to crunch them all up to the end, if that's okay with you. But please take notes. Please, as I say, just use the chat box so that at the end of this we can kind of go into it. And to be honest, I don't want to be the one talking for forever. I'm much more interested in how I can help you analyze or understand or even assist where you are now. Again, had the announcement been made, some of you may even have brought in some unsuccessful bids, and we could have looked over those, but we'll get to that later. Could I have the third slide, please, Bex? Thank you. So here we go. What does a CIF awarded school look like? Now, we all live in a sector where there's just so much data around, and in my role as a governor, I remember, let alone timetabling or academic performances, exam results, etc. Oh boy, you do swim in a lot of it, and there's no shortage of it out there. But it's a kind of how we use that. What are our metrics? What are our indices? How do we look at what the best analysis? What's the story it's going to tell us? We can't always provide the definitive answer, but we can provide options for others to join the dots. And so we cannot really confidently quantify or plan or program without having contemporary accurate data from which to draw upon. And that's how I go about my life when I'm looking at how I'm going to help schools in terms of their CIF bids, for example. So I've used a whole range of data from the obvious gov.uk sites, National Audit Office, Creston Reeves. Obviously, having written bids for the best part of a decade, I've got more than enough data of my own. But by bringing it all together and using publicly available data, the idea is that using the usual standard deviation, plus or minus from the field, etc., we can start to understand what schools are benefiting, are being successful, and I guess by implication, which schools are not going to be or struggle particularly hard to receive their wins. The data that I've used, I will at some stage be passing on to both Schools Week and TES, because they'll need to run their own filters over it. They'll need to kick those tyres. But I wouldn't be surprised that once I've added in the May CIF data, which we hope, I wouldn't be surprised if there's not a story coming out in June that kind of starts to ask some serious questions really about where the awards are going. Anyway, we shall see. We shall look forward to that in June. And if any of you, if I've got any great data analysts out there who love nothing more than tackling a spreadsheet, please contact me afterwards, and I'll share it with you. And by all means, you can create your own pivot tables, etc. Anyway, enough of that. This kind of I was going to add in Ofsted, good or outstanding, but frankly, I thought I'd just stick to the four socioeconomic indices. And we can start to understand that Conservative MP constituencies tend to dominate, and that is including the plus and minus from the 2019 general election, whereby Conservative MPs have secured 6% more than their awards, than their constituencies, and Labour have actually received 9% less. So there's all sorts of interesting data out there. Obviously, again, subject to the number of CIF eligible schools within each of the RSC regions, we can start to see which regions are receiving the greater percentage of awards, and you wouldn't be too surprised to understand that most of those are in a Conservative constituency MP. Okay. The other thing we can understand is that the 20% of those schools in the areas of most of the highest multiple deprivation receive the less, and those schools in the areas of least multiple deprivation score the most. And the other thing we can look at is schools with a financial surplus. So again, subject to the end of year account returns, we can understand that the average school is sitting on about £427,000 worth of reserves. And again, we can look at which schools are awarded CIF from those numbers as well. So I just wondered, Becky, if you could possibly get the little poll together. So we'd just be interested to see if there's a snapshot from your own individual experiences and whether that represents the wider data that we've collected.
Thanks, Tim. So if that hasn't popped up on your screen, you should be able to see it in a panel on the right-hand side.
So I'm just wondering how many of you obviously are in a Conservative constituency, how many of you are in a region which traditionally does particularly well, those that have the plus or minus in terms of reserves, and those that can understand that if they are in an area of multiple deprivation or in a low one.
Okay, responses are coming through.
I guess we're just going to ask ourselves: is this a microcosm of that sort of trend, of that pattern? There's nothing overly scientific about it. It's just a way of just testing you guys and seeing if you're awake, obviously, whether you've drifted off yet. Hopefully, we'll move from the macro into something a little bit more obvious in a minute.
Okay, so far 36% of people said that they are in conservative constituency. And then it's pretty even across the other three.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, the constituency seems to be the front runner. But it does actually show that very few people meet all four of the metrics.
Yeah, interesting. Absolutely.
Any more responses coming through? Okay. Do you want me to go back to sharing?
Whenever you're done, we'll go to slide 4. So, which projects are most likely to be awarded? Not quite Maslow's hierarchy of need, but the ESFA's version instead. And obviously, each December, circa 4,000 applications are made from the circa 5,000 CIF eligible schools. That's a hell of a number. And obviously, each Easter, dare we say, or once the publication is finally made, it's a rough average of about 1,400 awards to about 1,200 schools. So we can see straight away that very, very few schools actually are successful. Those that make 2 bids are successful with both bids. The CIF pot is traditionally around £450 million. I know that we had that wonderful bumper year a couple of years back where we had a second tranche, and that really funded a whole load of extra projects, which was more than welcome. But as a rule, that's roughly the number that we get. The average award is around £300,000. Obviously, there are those that are much smaller, and those that are north of £1 million. But if you look at it, it's kind of between £300,000 and £500,000 that I would say is the average award, because this is a once in a generation award, really. You know, it's not for cosmetic stuff. This is stuff which the output spec will probably want to see, guaranteeing at least 25 years of worth there. So the stakes are pretty high here. Okay. And obviously the threshold itself depends on the size of the pot, the size of the awards, and also particularly now that the ESFA are asking for that much larger percentage of financial contribution, the more money that they can take from those more able to afford such a contribution, the more they can spread that across schools who perhaps don't have that sort of wherewithal. So in the past 6 years, we know, for example, that 7 schools have received 9 awards, 19 have got 8, 38, 7, and 76 have received 6. So you can kind of start to build up a picture there. Roofing bids, they make up approximately a quarter of those 1,000 bids that go in each year, and yet only between 3 and 350 are awarded. So about 1 in 3. So there's a huge amount of wastage in terms of those types of bids that are prepared. And a little later, I'll explain to you probably why there's such a large number of roofing bids that go in. Another interesting stat was over the last 6 years, less than 7% of schools in deficit were successful with their submission. So what sort of projects are the ESFA most likely to fund? Okay, we get our annual guidance in October. I wish it was a damn sight earlier in the year, to be honest, but October it is. And whilst in recent years they have certainly perhaps removed the veil in terms of transparency towards the number of marks that a school can accrue subject to their level of financial contribution. And again, obviously last year, there was a particular focus on energy efficiency and sustainability, with marks being available where you can demonstrate, probably through your options appraisal, when you've looked at the options for replacing key components or fabrics, whether there was an element of, in your decision to go with a particular system, an element of sustainability, an element of energy efficiency towards that at all. I think that one way of looking at this is that though most of the types of projects tend to be relatively stable, okay, and from my understanding and appreciation of looking through the ESFA's prism, I think it's pretty much, you've got to think of it in terms of risk effectively. So we're talking risk to life, risk to school closure, and risk to basically interruption for the core curriculum. Okay, so risk to life projects would be the obvious things: fire safety, gas and electrical non-compliance, asbestos removal, Legionella, safeguarding, some structural, etc. The obvious types of projects which actually pose a risk to all stakeholders' lives. So clearly they are most likely to be funded. Then we obviously get to things like risk to school closure. And I guess the obvious thing there is going to be boilers, okay, and distribution, because without hot water and heating, either if it's a primary school with just one plant room, it could affect the whole school and it'd be a full closure, or whether it's a larger secondary school, subject to the number of plant rooms, it may only affect a certain number of blocks. But the bottom line is that if that school is subject to closure, we all know this, that obviously parents will be ringing up both the school and the local authority saying, I can't go to work today. You know, what the impact on that school being closed is huge. And it affects, as I say, not just the school, but obviously, you know, the local authority, etc., and the wider economy. So there's again where you can evidence the genuine threat to school full or partial closure. It's more likely again to be funded. And then we get things like risk to the core curriculum. Now, there's a good one that I can think of straight away, is that I had a school down in Hampshire, and it was positioned at the bottom of a chalky hill. They had put in hard standing surfaces, tennis courts, hockey pitches. The school had expanded over the last 60 years, so they put in other buildings, and they'd all been linked by hard standing walkways. So when rain would come down the banks, it would hit hard standing surfaces, have nowhere to go, and effectively, literally, at the bottom of the hill, where its science and maths blocks were, they were effectively literally under ankle deep in water. It was that bad. And I think, without giving too much away, I think Zurich had been clobbered for about 600 grand over the last few years. That is how bad and how big an impact that sort of flooding had. And it was obviously a very important subject in terms of maths and science, and not something you can replicate in a hall if you need a laboratory. So again, those types of impacts on the core curriculum. In other words, if the building being affected is an outbuilding or frankly even an office, it doesn't really carry the same weight as the type of classroom or building if the school has differentiated itself. If it's a STEM school, then clearly the science, or if it's a sports college and all of the halls are getting wiped out, or a drama one where the drama room is getting wiped out, you can kind of follow me. Those really, they differentiate the type of building and therefore the type of impact in terms of the impact to the school. So eventually that bid that I'm talking about in Hampshire was successful, and probably one of the most happiest schools I think I've ever had a win from, that they were so delighted. So those are the types of projects that are going to be funded. It's not going to basically cover the cosmetic ones. Wherever you can, those are the three that you want to be looking at in terms of when you're debating which type of bid to consider. So Becky, please could we go on to slide 5 now? Marvelous. The matrix. Okay, so as we know, there are 3 elements, are all weighted differently. Project need is marked, or it carries 60. It's marked out of 20. Each mark thus carries 3 marks, or 1%. Project planning carries 1 mark. It's marked out of 15, and therefore each mark is 1%. Project cost, or value for money, is now 25. Gone up from 15, don't forget. That's how important it is now. Marked out of 25, and therefore each mark is effectively 1.66. Now, project need is obviously going to be talking about what the school is at risk of. Okay, in there we're going to be looking at all of the supporting compliance and condition need, all of its data, all of the surveys, all of the photographs, all of the expenditure records. We need to be able to prove we need to be able to prove the need in spades, and we need to draw upon as many third-party, individual, external sources as possible to get that score up as highly as possible. What impact is this failed building fabric or component having on the school's day-to-day operations? How does this particular project affect your adherence to good estate management for schools, for GEMS? Okay, in other words, what you're trying to prove here is this is not an ad hoc submission. This forms part of our wider estate strategy. That's the sort of thing you've really got to bang home to the evaluator. That's what he's going to be looking for. Project planning. Okay, what are the risks to the project being delivered on time, to budget, etc.? So in there, the detailed options appraisal, costed evidence that the most appropriate solution has been cited. A detailed program, a proper Gantt chart with the key milestones, evidencing how the project has been designed, how it's going to meet the school's specific and site work packages. A resource schedule that marries up to the program. So if the program says it's going to take 12 weeks to deliver, we want to see the resource schedule. Okay, is it just one man and his dog, or is there a full team out there? Is there 4 operatives? Have we built in the building control stop and checks? Have we got in the on-site health and safety audits? It needs to be detailed, because they're going to be looking at, has this program genuinely been thought about? Is this a bespoke program to deliver this? Because if it's not, if it looks like a cut and paste from another job, another project somewhere else, it doesn't exactly inspire the confidence that we need to be able to find. Okay, so obviously, again, a site and work package specific risk register. That's what they're going to be looking at. Again, not a generic one. Project cost. Okay, what are the costs related to the successful delivery of that project? Are the rates within the ESFA's own benchmark bands? And if they're not, how do you justify that? Have you got abnormal costs? Is the particular job on a sloping site something that would make it slightly different to the average? You have to justify why your cost would be up beyond what the benchmark would be. Has the project been tendered and is thus market tested? Has cost certainty been provided? Okay, they want to make sure that when those bids go in, that as many contingencies have been crossed off, that you know exactly there's not going to be any nasty discovery later on, because as you know, there are no variations. The ESFA will not be coming to bail you out later on. So they're going to be really looking at exactly, when they look at the tender returns, they want to see a proper breakdown of the scope of works. They want to see each item basically put prices against, so they can understand what it definitely definitively covers. And obviously this requires no shortage of work to go into, I can assure you. So they obviously also want to know, and this is key to you guys, what is the financial contribution that the trust is willing or able to commit to, either from reserves or meeting the ESFA's own affordability criteria. Okay, don't forget that the marks there are to be accrued subject to the percentage of the overall project cost. So the bottom line is this: if you don't contribute, you're not going to get any marks. It's as simple as that. Obviously, they've now shown the sliding scale in terms of the marks that you can accrue subject to the level of your ability to be able to make those contributions. If we look at the CIF matrix, okay, we can see the route to crossing to get to that magic threshold. Obviously, as I said before, the threshold can change subject to the size of the pot, the number of bids, the size of contributions that other trusts have been able to make. But you can see, I mean, for me, if you aren't scoring 15 out of 20 for the need, which is the lead driver for this, then the question is was there a bid there ever, or has the bid not been packaged as well as it should? I really don't see any reason to get less than 15, and I think that would be the obvious starting point. Again, for me, project planning is an open goal. There's not really much to do there. You know what I mean? Anyone can produce the Gantt chart, the resource schedule. So again, I really don't see why you should score less than 12. Anything above that, on top of your minimum 45, gets you that much closer to the magic threshold. For me, for my money, it all depends really on the value for money side of stuff. And that is where, unfortunately, the trust have that ability to be able to be masters of their own destiny in terms of their affordability to be able to make a contribution. Because if you don't make a contribution, if you lose the marks that are available within that section of the project cost or value for money element, then the pressure it puts on need in particular, because that's where it's carrying 3 marks, you're gonna have to score much higher on the need to be able to get it through. So the value for money section is just so important. It really is, and that's where we kind of get to the idea that that you genuinely have a big contribution to be able to make. I mean, as I said before, had the marks been awarded this year, and had some of you been able to bring with you your ESFA scores and feedback, we could have deduced, we could have looked at the comments made and worked out why X, Y, and Z it hadn't been successful. And I do this as a matter of course. If my bids aren't successful, I will go back to the trust, and obviously it's transparent in terms of the feedback that come from the ESFA, and we will sit down and we will look at why it didn't work. And if the comments say could have tried harder, I've frankly got nowhere to go. If the comments are the bid would have scored more marks had the school been able to contribute at all or more, then it kind of falls back onto the trust. But I think we've probably all been there. Missing it by 1% is utterly heartbreaking because of all of the work that's gone in, all of the raised expectation, and the awful job that the SBM or the SBL or the CFO has to go back to the board and say we weren't successful. It's not a pleasant experience, but at least if you can go with the analysed data, you can go back and explain, and therefore you might decide that okay, we can fix some of these tweaks and we'll resubmit. Or it may be that the gap is too big and you're probably better off looking at an alternate sort of project to go forward, in the future years. I mean, I did say earlier that some bids are easier to prove, okay, and they're much easier to assemble the requisite information to provide to the evaluator. So if there's a hole in a roof and water's pouring in, it's pretty self-evident, okay. But if you've got, for example, I've got a classic example of a school down in Kent where they put in new boilers, but they didn't put in the new distribution, didn't put in a new pipework, and therefore the water pressure kept dropping and evidence of leaks kept appearing in various corridors. Now, to be able to collect the requisite photographic evidence would mean actually having to get into those buried pipeworks. It meant that you'd actually have to basically accrue a cost at the front end to carry out the surveys. We had to do that. We had to send off the pipework for analysis to prove the amount of rust, Legionella, etc. in there. But it's quite a turgid, staid submission for the evaluator to look at because it's very difficult. It's not got the money shots in terms of the pictures, if you see what I mean. So some bids are easier to prove than others, and others are downside harder. So again, you've just always got to think about where you're going to work that out. So can I have the 6th slide now, please? So not all bids are equal at all. So we know, do we not, from the National Audit Office, and I think we even know from the ESFA themselves, that we're about £11 billion in backlog funding behind to bring up our school estates to fit for purpose, whether you describe it as satisfactory or good. And that is despite the fact that every year circa £2 billion is made available. There's about £1.5 billion under SCA, obviously about £500 million under CIF, and don't forget all the DFC. But that £2 billion every year is still not staying ahead of the depreciation, the dilapidation of the estate. So we seem to be constantly stuck in this downward spiral, and which is why it makes CIF is so very important to schools. And that's why every bid is vital, and that's why everyone, every single bid is an ugly contest, to be honest. It's a race to the bottom, isn't it? Because there are an absolute criteria, the criteria that we all look through when we receive the ESFA guidance, but there's also a relative criteria, isn't there? Because you're up against other schools who are in probably equally, sometimes even worse condition than your own. So you've always got to look about ways in which you can differentiate, make your bid stand out from all of the others. So as mentioned, 4,000 a year and only 1,400 awards. Not going to be easy, is it? Okay, so you've got to find ways in which you can make your one stand out from that crowded field. So although it says the condition improvement fund, okay, you've really got to look to how you can include other risks to the condition. Okay, so you've not only got to evidence the end of life cycle for your key components and fabric, but can you add in extra risks? Are the health and safety issues in there, for example? So I'm going to use one quick example, an example I have of two schools, both with 70 plus years, single pane crystal windows. Okay, awful, you know. Well, they've served their time, they've been magnificent, but clearly the heat's going out and they've buckled, twisted, some are screwed shut, some you can't even close, just a nightmare. So the difference there was that one school could prove that kids were climbing out of an upper story window and dropping down to retrieve balls, tennis balls, footballs or whatever, onto a lower floor flat roof. And the risk involved in those kids climbing out of those windows at an upper floor were that much higher than kids who basically just climbed out on the ground floor and, you know, and did a runner into the fields. So wherever you can differentiate, wherever you can add in a health and safety element, you've got to do it. So again, think of schools with pitched roofs, with slates or with tiles. The school that can evidence the slipped tile, you may both may be able to evidence missing tiles, but the school that can pick up evidence that that tile has crashed onto the playground, putting at risk obviously kids, teachers, the public, etc. And this is important, and got photographic evidence and includes it in a near miss risk register, though that school will do far better than the one that can just point at a missing slate. It's all of that really good, applying all of that really good housekeeping and bringing your site management team into understanding the collection of this data, because we will come in at certain times to collect it, but it's all about all of the stuff that you've already got in-house, if you like. Okay, and it's those additional risks that are going to basically differentiate, and you're going to score higher than the other school down the road that hasn't perhaps put that into practice, etc. Another good thing is always show your DFC. Okay, so let's just say that 50% of your DFC is currently being spent on running repairs to the roof. Okay, we need to capture that. Is that being done by an external contractor, or are you blessed so that you have really good site management team? Okay, great. If he's doing it, it needs to have a log to it. We need to understand how much time he is spending to running that repair. And also we're going to look at, if it's taking 50% of your DFC to basically be running that repair, what impact is it having on all of the other parts of your schools, your windows, your boilers, etc., your fences? The impact that DFC is taking for that element, it's basically going to leave those exposed, isn't it? They're not going to be given the proper maintenance and love that they're going to need, and therefore they're going to depreciate at a faster rate. So again, always try and bring in those things. Obviously, again, we're now in a world where we're looking towards, you know, net zero. Anything that you can evidence in terms of energy efficiency, always use. One example here, obviously, I think there's 8,000. The last time I heard, there were 8,000 temporary buildings across our estate. Oh, God. You're obviously going to be looking to replace those. Okay, so there's a big choice, there's a big range of those out there, but one certain type that's come around at the moment is it's actually clad in solar. So not just on the roof, the actual walls are now clad in solar, so that temporary building can effectively be can run itself, and the solar that the electricity that it generates that's not used in that classroom can then go back to the host. Little things like that in your options appraisal, where you've looked at what the market can offer you, and it will again will attract attention and additional marks from the evaluators, because you're proving that you're on the right track, you're looking towards net zero. Okay, in my experience, the more collaborative the partnership between school, consultant and supply chain, the better the bid will be, okay? Because you guys sit on so much evidence that we can't always access straight away. You'll sit on floor plans, you'll have the expenditure logs, you'll have a whole range of other impact statements that perhaps that cold classroom's had, kids sitting there in mittens or hats because the room's so cold. All of that information is really vital to us. So the more, as soon as you can identify the right consultant that you can trust to work in a collaborative partnership with over some years, the better your bids are going to be. They really are. It's a two-way process. Again, we obviously work at risk, as do our supply chain. We know that schools can't afford to do surveys at risk at the front end. So again, you've got to think that schools to kind of meet that, to have that collaborative partnership relationship, they kind of need to not come back with a we can't afford to put a bid in, or sorry, we can't afford to make a contribution towards that bid. It kind of needs to be more, can you afford not to? Because it's a partnership here. I don't know where else you're going to get 70+% funding. You know, it is a good deal. Putting even 10% in or would really help matters. It really would, and it would build the trust up, because for consultants that are asked to go and put in a hell of a lot of work to make a really good quality bid, and the school not to be able to make a contribution, it's not the ideal partnership, I would suggest. And I'm not just talking about me, I'm saying that that's probably exactly how everyone else feels across the sector. I would also suggest that, you know, the earlier you start, the better. 100%. If you wait till the third week of September, once the schools have come back, and then you start thinking, oh, I think we'll get a bid together, the quality of the survey, and therefore the quality of the final bid, will not be as good as those that were written earlier in the year. The reason being that when schools instruct consultants who then use their supply chain to go out and carry out the surveys, if they're doing 5 a day, the quality of that report will need rewriting. It's just a matter of case. It's just inevitable, because they're going to be under so much pressure to get those surveys back. So again, the quality end of the market, and that's genuinely where you need to be. The sooner you can start, the sooner you can have a strategy for picking off what type of projects you want to basically bid for earlier in the year, the better. I mean, in the next month, you're going to know, for example, whether you were or weren't successful with the current bids. I would definitely start again there in terms of, do we go with that or do we look at something else? If we're going to look at something else, we really need to get the ball rolling. Okay. That they are the sorts of things that you kind of really need to be considering. Obviously, we're going to know in the next little while whether that's going to pay off or not. I cap the number of bids I write each year, because I don't want to dilute the quality. For me, it's always about the quality, because you're in a quality field. If you want your bid to stand out, it cannot just be a template. It cannot just be out of a sausage factory. It's really got to be bespoke, and that takes time and love and care and attention. And you can't write 100 bids with that, especially because you're always dependent on the costs coming back late and all of the rest of it. So I think my advice again there would be to you, if you think you've got 2 bids, and if you've got 2 strong bids, then that's great. Go for 2 bids, especially if you've got the requisite financial wherewithal to support 2 bids. Last year, I spent a lot of time with schools where effectively they said, no, this is our priority bid. We want to put whatever resources we've got, that's time as well as money, into securing that bid. So we're going to defer that second potential bid till next year, because hopefully we'll be successful with this one. Next year there might be better evidence, we might have more money to invest in it. Also, do we really want 2 projects running at the same time in the school? Can we absorb that level of disruption if we were to be successful anyway? So I think sometimes less is more. I think sometimes it's better not to feel pressured to try and write 2 bids if there's not 2 bids there. I'm not discouraging you. If there are genuinely 2 bids there, you should go for it. And my advice would be to put X more money in the priority bid, and at least 5%, say, if you could afford it, in the second bid. Okay. Well, I mean, this should be able to tell us really where we are in terms of how you can best present your bids, and how you can best work with your supply chain and your consultants. it's not a science. It really isn't, because there are just too many variables and vagaries in terms of the final award. You know, as well, we all know as kids or as teachers, that it doesn't matter, even though the ESFA provide a marking scheme for the external markers, evaluators, to look over the bids. Clearly they have their marks, but subjectivity creeps in. It is impossible to get 1,000 people to produce the same level of objectivity when they're looking at bids. And as I've also said, some bids are that much easier to mark. Some bids are that much clearer. Some bids are just a mess in terms of there's just too much text there. They make it difficult for the evaluator to find the evidence because it's just buried, and they don't have a lot of time to be able to identify the evidence. They should be able to look at it and say, yes, there's a strong bid there, and they should be able to find all of the requisite evidence that they're going to be looking for. If you make their life more difficult, the chances are they're probably not exactly going to be endeared to you, and you might not get that extra mark that we all really need. Listen, thank you for listening to me today. I hope we've still got enough time for many of your questions. Thank you again for the platform, Becky, and it's kind of back to you guys.
Thank you, Tim. That was brilliant. I mean, I was jotting things down myself all the way through it, saying, well, how do you get the edge over somebody else that's got a very similar bid to yourself? And yeah, you've absolutely covered it by saying it's all about evidence, it's all about incidents, and it's all about making it really clear and easy for the bid readers to be able to understand. So, well, just first of all, have you got the inside scoop? Do you know when the announcement's coming out?
No, no one does. I mean, I understand from a good source that it will be out this month. Obviously, there's still 3 weeks left of this month. There's always rumour mills around this every year. It's hilarious, and in my experience, no one knows. It's just pure speculation. We understand it's this month.
Thank you. Okay, just go to some questions. And just before I go into questions, just to make it clear to anybody, or just thinking if you hadn't joined our sessions before. So SBS and Tim Warneford Consulting are working in partnership to help schools in the best way that we can to achieve value for money. So Tim's obviously the fundraising, bids, procurement and project management, and SBS from the finance and budget management support of the side of things. So we work very closely together to help schools. So Sarah said that she's a maintained school, so she can't apply for a CIF, but she was very interested in what Tim had to say. And I think that's a really good point, Sarah, because the CIF bids that Tim's been talking about, it's not just specific to that. When you're going out to suppliers with your tenders, it's really useful for you to be able to see almost what those companies are going through. We're all in the same boat together. Kevin said, why is score in project planning column sum of output need and PP scores? Should it just be the simple score for PP column?
Say that again, sorry. Let me just have a look. Is he looking at matrix, or where are we on?
It was the matrix. It was about the scoring. So it was project planning is the column sum of output need. Yeah, based on the matrix. Should it just be the simple score for the project planning column?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question. Output need. Oh, yeah, so project need, project planning, value for money. They're the 3 sections. They're broken down into their 3 sections, and they carry different scores. So the project planning was the. I'm just trying to understand what if I've not made it clear, help me. Ask me the question again.
Kevin, do you want to turn on your microphone and ask?
Yeah, I've just done that. I think it's just that when you look at the scores on the matrix, which I can't see on the screen now, the project planning was something like 60 when it was basically the 12 plus the 48 from the first column. So I think it's just a mathematical presentation, and it just seemed to be that you've got the first 2 aggregated in the second score, not just individually.
So what I'm saying is, if you score 15 in your project need, you get 45. And if you 13 from your project planning, you get 50. It takes you to 58.
Yeah, I would say it is a cumulative. They're not.
Yeah.
I would have,
so what I'm trying to need you to do is to go across and see the scores. So I think if you use the need and the planning, that shows you how close you are going to be to the ultimate one, kind of what it needs for the value for money. So if you scored 14 from your project planning on top of your 15 from your need, you'd be like 1 point closer. So forgive me for not making it clear. Sorry.
Thank you.
Just had a question. Absolutely. The recording and the presentation slides will be shared with all of you after the session, so you can go back and rewatch and reread. So just a question then. So when the schools do come back and people have looked at the analysis of what they've received on their bids, Tim, what's the next steps? Do they come direct to you? Do they come via SBS? If they want to talk about how they went.
I mean, you should always. So it's transparent, okay? That's the wonderful thing that the ESFA do. They're gonna give you your scores. If you're not successful, you're going to get your scores and you're going to get your comments. And personally, I think you both parties, both the consultant, whoever you've used, and the school should have a really open, frank chat about why they weren't successful, and ultimately decide whether that relationship is still good or not. And if they want me to try and help them understand why it wasn't successful, then I'm always more than happy to do that. The matrix there hopefully will be of some assistance, because, as I said, there will be that many more unsuccessful schools than successful schools this month. That's just the way it goes. It's sad, but that's the level of funding. And you kind of got to ask yourself, was there a bid there originally? Was there definitely a bid there? Because some schools and some consultants decide to submit a bid where, frankly, it was never there. And therefore, there should be no surprise. It's just one hell of a lot of time and energy that goes in, and expectation that goes into it, only to discover that you weren't successful. So first question is there a bid there? If there is, then why didn't it work? What went wrong? And they're the questions that I think that the school and their current service provider should have a really open conversation over.
So a couple more questions in the chat. Great one from Kemi and from Julia. And then I've got one that came in for somebody that wasn't able to attend today. So Kemi said, thank you for this very informative webinar. Being new to the academy sector, this is all new to me. Regarding financial reserves, are schools with a surplus looked at less favourably in terms of bid success?
So all schools are invited, genuinely invited, to make a financial contribution, whether it's from reserves or whether they can go through the CIF affordability criteria and get a CIF loan. Obviously, as part of that process, i.e. if you don't have reserves to draw upon and you're looking at a CIF loan and it's like a mortgage, they're going to be checking your affordability. If you're unable to, if they don't think you're going to be able to afford to service that loan, then you're probably going to be unsuccessful. If you're in deficit, it's going to be even harder to be able to prove and get that money. I mean, obviously, some schools, some consultants do submit bids where there is no financial contribution. You just won't accrue the marks in the project cost, and the ESFA will be clearly looking at who do they favour, where do they invest money to. We were supposed to meet robust governance and good financial management. And if a school's in deficit, there's question marks over those two, isn't there? I suggest.
So, Julie, so I'm going to come back to you in a second, but Christine has asked, if only 7% of schools in deficit are successful, how can we improve our chances?
Yeah, I mean, if there is a genuine, if there is a big need there, i.e. the school's closed, for example, if you've got an audit trail that shows that the school on 2 or 3 occasions had to close its doors, it was not fit for purpose, then, and you haven't tried to get yourself an emergency loan, then of course you should definitely proceed with a bid, even if you can't make a financial contribution. One of the things I've always tried to get from the ESFA is that it's lovely that they are asking, if you like, the more wealthy trusts to make up to a 30% financial contribution. That's great if they're going to use that to cross-subsidise those schools that haven't got the money. They just aren't prepared to tell me or to tell us whether that's true. But if there is a genuine need there, you just have to do it. But you need to make sure the bid is written as well as possible. It really needs to be very, very clear. So not only is the empirical evidence of actually having a need there, i.e. your roof's falling in or the boiler's not working, but you've got to make sure that that bid is prepared through all of those sections as well as it possibly can be.
Thank you. So somebody wasn't able to join us today says, we've been repeatedly unsuccessful with our bids. Why? What are we doing wrong? Obviously, that's difficult without you seeing what they submitted, but what are the kind of common mistakes that people make?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think go back to the hierarchy of need. You know, what is the risk going on here? Okay, is this essential or is this desirable? Really, I guess I'd start there. I.e., is there a need there? And then after that, are you making a financial contribution? If not, okay. And how well is the bid being, as I say, being presented? That how much evidence are you drawing from? And constantly go back over those ESFA feedback. Constantly look at to see if there's a pattern emerging there. This is missing. More photographic evidence would have been better, or that there's only 2 tenders came back, or have a look, because it's quite clear what the ESFA are looking for. And if you haven't met that, there's a story to be told there, I'm afraid.
So Julia says that they are hoping to submit bids in the next round. Do you know the dates for this submission, please?
It's normally traditionally the second week of December. I think let's call it the 10th or the 11th of December. The route through this will be, the announcement will be coming out obviously this month. There will be a period for appeals. Appeals tend to be, the number of appeals get less and less each year. The only chance of appealing, or the only chance of successfully appealing, is if the evaluator has made a material error. Okay, so you can't add new evidence. They've actually got to have added something up wrong, or they've said to you, oh, sorry, the bid would have been better if you'd included a Gantt chart, and you just, well, it's in Appendix 3. That's where it is. You've got grounds for appeal. So there will be an appeal period. I would encourage that person to start looking at what projects they want to fund now, or bid for now. Start collecting the evidence as quickly as possible. Guidance will come out in October, which will just make it specifically clear in terms of what the ESFA hierarchy of need is this year. And then you need to get it in and up on the portal normally by the close of play on the last day of the second week of December.
Thank you. So Kemi's got her hand up. I think she'd like to actually ask a live question. Feel free to put your camera on if you like.
Oh, okay, I will do. Hi, Tim. Thank you
Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. Oh, good morning even. It's not 12 12 just yet. Thanks for your answer to my question. As I mentioned, it's all quite new to me, but we are considering submitting a bid. And it was just the rumours that I've heard with regards to schools in a surplus, and just wanting to get some more clarity on that. So there are schools that will have a healthy surplus and may want to be considered for a bid because that surplus they've made plans to use for maybe other things. Is there a sort of happy medium in terms of how much of your surplus you should be willing to use as a contribution towards the CIF bid? I just wanted to get a steer as to how much that should be, if there is one.
Okay, so if you go to the gov.uk and if you look up the guidance, in the guidance there's a sliding scale that shows you how many marks you can accrue subject to the percentage of contribution you are prepared to make for the cost of the project. So let's just say, for example, the project's £500,000. You would get X number of marks if you put in 10% at £50,000, and you would get that many more marks, up to 6 marks, if you put in the maximum, which is 30%. So those schools that have surplus, those schools that see a brilliant, return on investment of something that they're going to have to fund at some stage themselves, and they don't want to pay 100% for, but they are prepared to pay from 30% downwards, hey, it's not a bad return. Unfortunately, there are those schools that simply don't have 30%, they don't even have 10%, and they are the ones that are going to struggle really to get their bids through. There's an argument that says that those schools that with greater reserves but with less need are going to be more successful than those schools with greater need but less resources. Unfortunately, that's the lay of the land.
Okay, all right, thanks very much.
Okay, I'm always here. If you need to check anything else, just come back, it's fine.
Will do. Thank you.
Kemi, if you just look in the chat, Claire Skinner has just put a little response in for you. So one final question for today then for Tim is from Mrs. Busfield. When we get SCA funding, is there anywhere else we can get funding from to top up?
Sadly not. I mean, this is very often the dilemma. I have a trust that I work for in Northamptonshire, and they are 3 pupils from going from CIF eligibility into SCA. And from my experience and the advice I've traditionally given is if you're a state, if you're a trust of a size with less than 3,000 pupils, and you're in the CIF lottery stakes, and your estate is up to speed, then going into SCA is the clever thing to do, because it's guaranteed work, it's guaranteed income. You can plan, quantify, etc. If you've got an estate full of lots and lots of liabilities, millions of pounds worth of liabilities, and you tip into SCA, yes, the SCA money is guaranteed, but it's not going to give you the CIF wins that you can get. You know, £1 million for one school. You'd be lucky to get £1 million in SCA if you had 20 schools. So it's just it's a very careful balancing act to have, I think. So SCA, you've got the guaranteed money, you've got the DFC, you've got the ability to be able to basically make sure that you understand exactly where your liabilities and your risks lie across whichever number of schools you have in your trust. Understand where those liabilities are going to fall, and from your SCA plan them out better. You've also got the opportunity 100% to procure wisely. You can move from reactive maintenance into planned maintenance. There's lots of ways that you are in a stronger position than your CIF counterparts, but in terms of other big capital funding streams, then listen, obviously there's public sector decarbonisation scheme if you're looking at basically energy efficiency measures and installations, but you unfortunately don't have the opportunity of CIF. But don't forget, CIF, you know, it's 1 in 3, 1 in 4 schools that are going to be successful. You've got the birds in the hand, you know, your bird is in the hand. You can plan accordingly.
Thank you, Tim. So as ever, a really, really insightful session. Thank you so much. If anybody didn't have a chance to ask any questions today, as I say, we'll send out the recording and the slides. So you just reply to that email with any questions that you have, and we'll consolidate them all and send out if there's some common themes there. So I'm just going to put a link into the chat for the new upcoming sessions for Coffee Club. One that's not listed there at the moment that's an exciting one is the due diligence for single academy trusts for their future journey. So there'll be more information about that. As ever, any questions either for myself, for SBS, for Tim, please just let us know. And yeah, thank you once again for joining us. I'm just about to send out some Krispy Kreme donuts to people that have joined lots of sessions, so keep an eye on your inbox in case you were one of those lucky ones. Thank you very much everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you at a future session.
Thanks everyone. Cheerio. Thank you, Becky. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.